way. And I would never want someone else to be making those sort of plans, and I would never want someone else to not be
I'm
believed.
so sorry that you have to grow up in a world where this is still present.
Of taking care of people also really feeds me. And I think that is in many ways.
Meghan Markle in Paris. Now listen, we need to talk about what went down with that white-on-white gown situation, because what you are about to hear is not just some fashion drama. This is the story of how a duchess tried to rewrite luxury's rule book and got absolutely demolished by the most powerful fashion house on the entire planet. We are talking about private requests that became public humiliation, whispered rejections that turned into global headlines, and a war fought entirely in silence and symbolism. Here is the thing, when Hermès says no, they do not just close a door. They make sure everyone watching knows exactly why that door was never going to open in the first place. Real quick, if you want to see how this ends, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because what is coming is absolutely wild. Drop a like if you are ready for this story. All right, let's dive in. So, here's where it all started. It all began as something Meghan Markle thought would be this quiet, classy little favor, the kind of luxury request that happens behind the scenes. Late last year, Meghan's team reached out directly to Hermès headquarters in Paris. This was not a casual inquiry, not a "hey, can we get on the wait list" kind of thing. This was a full-on custom design request. And we are not talking about just any bag. She wanted a one-of-a-kind Birkin that would supposedly reflect her global influence and her philanthropic values. The specifications were incredibly detailed, ethically sourced leather, gold-plated hardware, and get this, a small engraved quote from one of her past speeches. The whole thing was meant to debut at an upcoming Montecito charity gala, a moment she had been planning as her official re-entry into elite fashion circles. Now listen, this kind of request is not totally unheard of. Celebrities and royals have gotten bespoke Hermès pieces before. It has happened. So, on paper, this should have been straightforward. A little special treatment, some custom details done. But here is the thing, according to insiders in Paris, what came back was not a polite, "let us check with our artisans" kind of response. It was stone cold. The email from Hermès' International Relations Department was polished, almost too polished, but the message underneath was crystal clear. Madam, Hermès does not accept external creative direction on heritage pieces. Our legacy is defined by the Maison, not by collaboration. Translation: you do not get to redesign history. You are not the designer here. And that should have been the end of it. Most people would have read that response, felt the chill, and backed off gracefully. But Meghan's team was not ready to let it go. Her senior stylist reportedly fired back within hours, suggesting that the design could actually redefine Hermès for a modern audience. A bold move. Then, the next day, another email landed in their inbox, this time from Meghan's personal assistant, really pushing the angle about aligning luxury with purpose. That is when things shifted. Hermès decided they were not going to keep this conversation private anymore. A senior executive in Paris took the entire email exchange, cleaned it up just enough to stay professional, and forwarded it to a small, influential group of fashion editors. They framed it as an example of modern entitlement meeting traditional craftsmanship. Within days, whispers started appearing across French fashion blogs. Nothing direct, nothing with names attached, but everyone knew exactly what they were talking about. A certain former royal attempted to dictate design language to Hermès this weekend. The story started spreading quietly, the way high fashion gossip always does, sophisticated, subtle, and devastating. And then, one post from a Parisian industry insider added 4 words that made the whole thing explode. They said no publicly. That is what the post said. 4 words that changed everything. Because here is what you need to understand about Hermès. This is a house that has built its entire reputation on discretion. They do not leak. They do not gossip. They do not air out private conversations. For over a century, that silence has been a part of their power. But when they decided to let this story slip into the fashion world's bloodstream, it was not an accident. It was a choice. And that choice made it clear they were making an example out of someone. The whispers started in Paris and spread to Milan within hours. Top stylists, The ones who dress A-listers for red carpets and fashion weeks were all texting each other variations of the same sentence. Hermès rejected her. No names were needed. Everyone knew. And the crazy part is that it stayed inside fashion circles at first. This was not tabloid drama yet. It was insider knowledge, the kind of gossip that gets passed around at industry brunches and public relations dinners. But once it jumped from private conversations to public blogs, there was no containing it. Le Monde ran a headline that did not mention anyone by name, but showed a photo of a Montecito hillside at sunset. It was subtle enough to avoid legal issues, but obvious enough that readers connected the dots immediately. Inside Montecito, the reaction was exactly what you would expect. According to someone close to the situation, Meghan was furious. Not just because Hermès had turned her down, but because of how they did it. They made it sound like a matter of principle, like she was the one crossing some invisible line of decorum. That same night, she called an emergency meeting with her public relations team. The directive was simple: get ahead of this. Control the narrative before it controls you. Her spokesperson started drafting a statement suggesting that Meghan had actually been the one to politely decline a partnership that did not align with her ethical values. Spin it as her choice, not theirs. A smart move, right? Except Hermès was already 3 steps ahead. Before that statement could even go out, the creative director of Hermès sat down for a major interview with Le Figaro. The journalist asked him about the rise of celebrity collaborations in luxury fashion, and his answer was surgical. Hermès doesn't collaborate, we create. There is a difference. The interviewer pushed a little further, asking if the brand ever made exceptions for really famous people. He smiled and said, "We have had many requests, some from very famous people, but when a name outweighs the craftsmanship, we must decline." The room, according to people who were there, laughed politely, but everyone in that room understood exactly what he meant. He did not have to say her name. The subtext did all the work for him. By the next morning, social media had finished the translation for him. Hermès rejects Meghan was trending on X and TikTok. People were dissecting every angle of the rumored custom bag scandal. The memes came flooding in, side-by-side photos of Meghan in her luxury, looks next to iconic shots of the Birkin, with captions like, "Not every door opens to a duchess." It was brutal. It was everywhere. And late-night hosts picked it up too, turning it into jokes about the world's most exclusive rejection. Inside Montecito, staffers were told not to mention Hermès at all. Just do not bring it up. But Meghan was not about to let Paris write the ending to this story, because in her mind, Hermès had not beaten her, they had challenged her. Meghan's team went into full crisis mode and launched what they internally called Operation Legacy Reset. The whole strategy was to pivot the conversation away from exclusivity and rejection, and instead frame everything around empowerment and ethics. A few days later, a charity video surfaced where Meghan appeared in this soft white blouse, speaking really passionately about the illusion of status and how true influence comes from impact, not labels. It sounds pretty wholesome, right? Except people in the fashion world immediately caught something. That exact phrase, impact, not labels, was the same wording the Hermès creative director had used in a 2019 interview about luxury and humility. Word for word. The fashion establishment noticed instantly. Headlines started popping up everywhere. Meghan subtly fires back at Hermès. Duchess calls out status culture days after Birkin snub. It was classic, really, polished enough to sound sincere, indirect enough to have plausible deniability, and timed perfectly to keep the conversation going. But Hermès was not having it. They released this incredibly short, incredibly cold press statement, reminding everyone that Hermès does not engage in public discourse, and paired it with an image of their founder's handwritten quote that said, "Luxury is what you don't see." The message was brutal in its simplicity. Your noise only proves our point. Silence is our statement. Still, Meghan's public relations team kept pushing. They started reaching out to stylists, sustainability influencers, and eco-luxury brands about a potential partnership. The pitch was all about promoting responsible luxury for a conscious world, with Meghan as the face of it, modern ethics meeting high-end design. On paper, it should have worked. But here is what actually happened. One by one, the brands said no. According to someone who works at a major fashion house, nobody wanted to touch it. They said being associated with her after the Hermès situation felt radioactive. Nobody wanted to be seen as the rebound brand. And it gets worse. Anonymous whispers coming out of Paris suggested that Hermès senior leadership had quietly passed the word to all their global branches to steer clear of influencers connected to recent controversy. It was not written down anywhere, nothing official, but in the fashion world, a whisper from Hermès carries the weight of law. A columnist for Business of Fashion summed it up pretty bluntly. When you try to edit a heritage brand, you don't change it. It edits you out. And that is exactly what was happening. Meghan had tried to position herself alongside timeless prestige, and instead, she was being quietly erased from it. But she did not stop. She decided to move forward with something called the Own It campaign. The whole concept was about independent designers, sustainable fashion, and bypassing the traditional luxury gatekeepers entirely. The tagline was luxury without permission. Bold, right? Except half the designers she approached pulled out before the first photo shoot even happened. Two photographers withdrew the day before filming, one of them sending this apologetic note that said, "We admire your courage, but we can't risk our contracts." Yikes. Still, Meghan went ahead with it anyway. The first image that went live showed her standing barefoot in this minimalist studio, wearing a linen trench coat and holding a hand-woven clutch. The vibe was very, "I don't need your approval." The post racked up millions of views within hours. Her supporters called it a powerful statement. Her critics called it a tantrum dressed up in linen. But what really shifted everything was what came next. A French journalist from Madame Figaro published this absolutely scathing column, and the level of detail in it was wild. The article was titled "The Duchess Who Wanted a Birkin," and it laid everything out in excruciating detail. Exact quotes from the emails, meeting times, even the specific quote she wanted engraved on the bag. Someone in Paris had handed over the entire exchange. And they did not hold back. The article walked through every step of the request. A Birkin cannot be earned through insistence, only through patience. Ouch! By the next morning, Birkingate was trending everywhere. The story was not just about fashion anymore. It had turned into this cultural thing, this symbol of celebrity versus tradition, influence versus heritage. And for Meghan's team, it was a nightmare that would not stop growing. According to people close to the situation, her communications director was up for 3 straight nights trying to contain the damage. But you cannot contain something like this. It was everywhere. The story had completely gotten away from them. Then, Hermès did something that just made it worse for her. They dropped a new campaign that same week. No statement, no interview, just this incredibly serene photo of an artisan hand-stitching a Birkin in their Paris workshop. The caption said, "Made by hand, not by headline." Listen, the elegance of that response cut so much deeper than any tabloid ever could. They did not need to say her name. They did not need to explain. That one line said everything. Inside Montecito, Meghan was reportedly struggling with how to respond. A private email she had sent to her team ended up getting out later, and in it, she wrote, "They humiliated me because I refused to bow to tradition. This isn't about a handbag, it's about hierarchy." She genuinely believed this was about power structures and who gets to sit at the table. So, she decided to address it head-on. She filmed this message for her foundation's YouTube channel, talking about women who have been told they are asking for too much, and how sometimes the world says no, not because you're wrong, but because they're afraid of change. It was polished, it was heartfelt. She clearly put a lot of thought into it. But here is the wild part. For the first time in her career, it just did not land. The comments section was split right down the middle. Half the people were sympathetic, saying she was standing up for herself. The other half was skeptical, pointing out the timing and questioning whether this was really about empowerment or just damage control. And then, one comment went absolutely viral. She asked for a bag, got a lesson, and turned it into a speech. That line spread everywhere. Within hours, TikTok exploded with parodies. People were reenacting her speech with fake Hermès executives in the background, nodding politely while dramatic violin music played. The internet had turned her moment of sincerity into a full-blown meme. And that is when you knew it had reached a point of no return, because once the internet decides you are the punchline, it is really hard to flip that script. But Paris was not done yet. A week later, Hermès held their spring show in Paris. And listen, what happened in that room was not subtle at all. When the cameras panned to the front row, there they were, Beyoncé, Amal Clooney, and Miranda Vale, the Vogue editor who had publicly clashed with Meghan months earlier. All three of them were sitting together, each one holding a different edition of the Birkin. No press release, no announcement. The image alone told the entire story. Hermès had chosen their muses, and one very specific name was nowhere to be found. Back in Montecito, Meghan saw the photo on her phone before she had even finished her breakfast. According to someone who was there, she just stared at it for a really long time without saying anything. Finally, she set the phone down and said quietly, "They're sending a message." And she was right, because that was not a coincidence. That was choreography. That was Paris making it crystal clear where the lines were drawn. The aftermath of that photo rippled through her entire world. Public relations firms that used to reach out to her started becoming mysteriously unavailable. Stylists who had begged to dress her for events suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Even people in Hollywood who had been friendly began quietly creating distance. One source described it as the Meghan effect, talented, beautiful, but just too volatile for the couture world. And here is the wild part. The fashion industry actually developed a new piece of shorthand. When an influencer started demanding too much from a brand, people would say, "Don't pull a Meghan." It became a thing. Summer rolled in, and with it came this really unsettling quiet. The phones stopped ringing. The invitations stopped showing up. Even the paparazzi seemed to lose interest. It was like she had been put on mute by an entire industry. A stylist in Paris summed it up pretty bluntly when they said, "Hermès isn't a company, it's a religion, and you don't rewrite scripture." Inside Montecito, Meghan's inner circle shrank down to just a handful of people who had stuck around. The ones who remained said she was still determined, still focused, but something had shifted. The energy was not about ambition anymore. It was more calculated now, more careful. Then, something unexpected showed up, an envelope from France. A luxury conference in Cannes was extending an invitation for her to join a panel about the future of ethical luxury. It was not Paris Fashion Week, but it was still France, still prestigious, still a chance to step back into that world on her own terms. Her team spent hours going back and forth about it. Some of them thought it was a setup, that the same industry that had frozen her out was now baiting her back in just to watch her stumble. Others saw it differently. They thought it could be the opening she needed to reset the narrative. Meghan decided to go. The speech she gave in Cannes was titled "Owning the Ask," and, honestly, it was really well done. There was no bitterness in her voice, no direct references to what had happened, just this calm, graceful talk about how the world tells women to know their place. But what if our place is actually at the table where the decisions are being made? The room gave her polite applause. It was not a standing ovation or anything, but it was not cold either. For the first time in months, the narrative around her felt neutral. That alone felt like progress. After the panel, a journalist from Le Journal du Luxe approached her for what seemed like a pretty friendly interview. They talked about sustainable fashion, about her foundation's work, the usual stuff. Then, midway through the conversation, he asked a question that seemed innocent enough. "Madam, if Hermès were to call you tomorrow, would you accept?" The cameras were rolling. Meghan hesitated for just half a second, and then she smiled and said, "I think the question is, would they be ready for me this time?" She meant it as confidence, as strength, as a woman who is not going to back down. But that is not how it played. By the next morning, headlines were everywhere. Meghan Markle challenges Hermès again. Would they be ready for me? The fashion establishment saw it as arrogance wrapped up in empowerment language. One columnist wrote that it sounded less like resilience and more like someone who still had not learned the lesson. The French press started calling it the Second Declaration. And, just like that, the story that had finally started to calm down exploded all over again. By noon, Hermès released a statement, One single line to the French media. Hermès is always ready for timelessness. That was it. Elegant, cutting, and absolutely brutal. The conversation that Meghan had been trying so hard to move past was now front and center again. But this time, it was not about a bag anymore. It was about pride. It was about who blinks first, and Hermès was not blinking. At their next showcase, the house decided to respond the only way they know how, through art. The finale of the show featured a model walking down the runway carrying a one-of-a-kind Birkin in this deep crimson color. A beautiful piece. But here is what made everyone in that room audibly gasp. Near the clasp, in small gold letters, were two words, toujours prête, always ready. Everyone there understood exactly what it meant. It was not just a bag, it was a direct reply. Photos of that Birkin flooded the internet within minutes. Every fashion outlet connected the dots immediately. Hermès answers Meghan in gold, always ready, trended globally. Back in Montecito, Meghan was watching the show on her iPad. Someone who was with her said her expression was completely unreadable. She did not react at first, did not say anything, just stared at the screen. Then she whispered, "They're mocking me in art form." Her husband tried to tell her it was not about her, that Hermès has always used French phrases in their designs, that it could just be a coincidence, but she knew better. In this world, nothing is ever said directly. Everything is symbolic, and that symbol was aimed straight at her. That night, she made a decision. No more trying to get back into their world. No more chasing validation from brands that had already made it clear she was not welcome. No more playing by rules that were never designed for her to win. She picked up her phone, opened her notes app, and typed out a line that would become the foundation of her next move. You can't reject a woman who builds her own table. By morning, her team had their instructions. They were going to build a brand from scratch. The concept was called Archetype Atelier, and the whole mission was about redefining luxury for women who do not sit around waiting for invitations. The launch was kept really minimal, just a simple website with a soft background and a short mission statement. Luxury isn't granted, it's reclaimed. Within hours, people noticed. Fashion editors who had been ignoring her requests for months were suddenly dissecting every detail of the launch. Social media split right down the middle. Half the internet was praising her for the reinvention, calling it empowering and bold. The other half was mocking it, calling it the revenge brand or Markle's answer to rejection. The products themselves were pretty understated: silk scarves, organic cotton accessories, and small leather pouches that were supposed to be inspired by female resilience. Nothing revolutionary, but the messaging behind them was clear. Each piece came with a handwritten quote embossed on the inside. Things like, "Ask anyway, own the room," and "Made without permission." It was pretty obvious who she was talking to and who she was talking about. The first week was actually kind of impressive. The limited run of 1,000 pieces sold out completely. But the buzz around it was not all positive. Vogue Paris wrote that it was not fashion, it was vengeance in packaging. The Telegraph called it the Duchess's luxury tantrum disguised as empowerment. And then, Le Monde ran a headline that really stirred things up. Hermès has a new rival, and it's personal. That headline changed everything. Here's the thing, Hollywood started paying attention. Streaming producers saw the whole situation and recognized it for what it was: a fallen royal taking on $1 billion fashion empire. One Netflix executive was apparently overheard saying, "Oh, if she wins this, she becomes the ultimate symbol of modern reinvention. If she loses, it's a tragedy. Either way, it's compelling content." Meghan, sensing that momentum, started documenting everything: design meetings, late-night calls with her team, even her private reflections on camera. One clip that eventually got out showed her saying softly, "They think I wanted their approval, but all I ever wanted was to be untouchable." That clip alone reignited the entire global conversation. Was this empowerment or was this obsession? People could not agree. But here is the wild part. Industry analysts started noticing something really unusual. Online searches for Hermès controversy had spiked by 900%. For the first time in decades, the untouchable French giant was trending for all the wrong reasons. And yet, Hermès said absolutely nothing. No statements, no interviews, no press releases, just that familiar, devastating silence. Because when Hermès goes quiet like that, it usually means one thing: they are preparing their final response. 3 weeks later, invitations started going out for a fall exhibition in Paris. The title was simple: The Language of Legacy. Inside the Palais de Tokyo, guests walked into this absolutely ethereal space, leatherwork suspended in midair, each piece representing one of the brand's core values: patience, craft, and heritage. But it was the centerpiece that made everyone stop. Right in the middle of the room stood this mirrored sculpture shaped like an open handbag, and engraved across it in gold serif font were the words, "Some things lose their value when they ask to be seen." No press release went out explaining it. None was needed. Every journalist in that room decoded the message instantly. Fashion reporters started calling it the most elegant response in industry history. Within hours, it went viral. The Guardian wrote, "A masterclass in power through understatement." Vanity Fair said, "Hermès didn't clap back, it whispered, and the world leaned in." Back in Montecito, Meghan was looking at images of that mirrored installation on her laptop. According to someone on her team, she stared at it for nearly a minute before finally closing the screen. "They'll never stop," she said quietly. "Even their silence is a weapon." Her team tried to reassure her, telling her that public sympathy was slowly shifting in her favor, that people were starting to see her side of things. But she had already learned the deeper truth. This world runs entirely on perception, and once that gets damaged, there is no restoring it. That evening, she sat down and wrote a private note. Two people close to her later confirmed that it was sent directly to Hermès headquarters. It did not contain any anger, no demands, no branding pitch, just one sentence: "Thank you for reminding me what legacy costs." Weeks went by. Then one day, the Archetype Atelier website quietly went dark. A small message appeared saying it was closed for restructuring. The social media accounts stopped posting. No announcement, no explanation, just silence. And honestly, that silence said more than any press release could have. Months rolled forward the way they always do. Fashion moved on to fresh scandals, new faces, the next season. But the echoes of this whole thing, they stuck around. Because here is what this story was never really about. It was not about handbags or headlines or even luxury. It was about something way more universal: the collision between reinvention and reputation, between wanting to rewrite your story and realizing some stories are already written in stone. In the end, Hermès did not have to win, they just had to wait. Time made their point for them. Somewhere in Montecito, beneath that endless California sun, a woman who was once called the most powerful royal in exile finally learned the hardest lesson of all. In a world built on quiet prestige, the loudest voice is often the one that never has to speak. So that is the story of how a duchess went to war with the most powerful luxury house on earth and learned that some battles are not meant to be won. They are meant to teach you where the real power lies. Wild ride, right? If you made it this far, drop a like and let me know in the comments what you think. Was Meghan in the right for pushing back, or did she miss the point entirely? I am curious what your take is. And if you are into stories like this, the kind that dig into what really happened behind the scenes, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we have got more coming. Stories the mainstream will not touch, told the way they should be told. All right, that is it from me. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.